Hey everyone, and welcome back.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet that you're here because you saw that YouTube video.
Oh, yeah.
Thousands of migrants to get new UK visas in 2025, and employers cautioned by Tochi Esther.
Yeah.
So we want to do a deep dive into that. We're
Absolutely.
not just going to recap the video, though.
Yo.
We really want to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on here
Yeah.
and why it matters. So,
The why.
yeah. So let's jump into it.
All right. So, um, on the surface, it seems like a pretty straightforward situation,
Yeah.
The UK needs around 45,000 seasonal workers,
Okay.
mostly in horticulture and poultry.
Okay.
So they're issuing these visas for 2025.
Right. And this program that we're talking about, the Seasonal
Yeah.
Agricultural Workers Scheme,
Uh-huh.
this started back in 2019 after Brexit.
Right.
Like, it was intended to deal with the labor shortages.
Right.
But it's interesting because wasn't Brexit, at least in part, about reducing immigration?
Yeah, it's this really interesting irony or tension, between these two kind of competing forces wanting to control immigration, but also needing workers to keep these industries afloat.
Right.
And I think that's where things get really interesting and kind of complicated.
So the UK government, of course, is putting a pretty positive spin on it.
Yeah.
They're pointing to this survey
Of course.
where 91% of workers said they had a positive experience.
Yeah, 91% seems like a pretty good number.
I see.
But the catch is this survey was done by the government.
Right.
So it makes you wonder, how representative are these findings? Are they
Right.
really digging deep enough to
Yeah.
uncover what's really going on? Because on the other side, you have more and more workers coming forward and talking about,
Yep.
exploitation, bullying, unfair wages, and terrible living conditions.
And it's not just anecdotal, right? Like,
right.
the BBC even reported that complaints to this worker support charity almost doubled in 2024.
Yeah, almost 700 complaints in a single year.
Yeah, that's a huge red flag.
Definitely a cause for concern. And I think the case of Ms. Casimiro really kind of exemplifies this issue.
Yeah.
She's actually in the process of taking her former employer to court.
Wow.
She's alleging unfair dismissal discrimination, being paid less than minimum wage.
Okay.
It's even being investigated as a potential case of modern slavery.
That's heavy.
Yeah, it is. And what's concerning is that this isn't an isolated incident.
Right. Yeah.
We saw something very similar play out with care workers a while back, facing almost the same types of exploitation.
Right.
So it makes you wonder if there's a systemic issue within these temporary worker programs in the UK.
Yeah, it really seems like the government is saying one thing,
Yeah.
and then you have all these workers saying the opposite.
Yeah.
Like, what are we supposed to believe?
It's really hard to know for sure, but the government claims they are cracking down on abuse.
Okay.
Doing farm visits, interviewing workers, but on the ground, it seems like things are actually getting worse.
Yeah, and there was this one part in the video that really stood out to me.
Right.
It said that some workers actually had their wages linked to how much they picked,
Yeah, that's right.
not how many hours they worked.
Yeah.
I mean, that just sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It definitely raises concerns.
Yeah, because if your pay is directly tied to your output,
Yeah.
which can vary for all sorts of reasons outside of your control,
Right.
then workers could feel pressured to work longer hours,
Right.
potentially for less pay.
Absolutely. And that's just one example of the potential for exploitation within this program.
So is this something that can even be fixed?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into that. But first, I think we need to understand the bigger picture here.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So I think this really exposes kind of the underbelly of globalization in a way.
Yeah.
We talk about goods and services moving freely, across borders.
Right.
But often what gets left out of the conversation is the people.
Yeah.
The people who are making those goods, picking those crops,
Yeah, it's like we're prioritizing the profits over the people.
Absolutely.
And this isn't even just a UK problem, right?
No, not at all.
We see similar issues in other countries
Yeah.
with temporary worker programs.
You see it in Canada, in the U.S.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a global issue.
It is.
And it often, creates this opportunity for exploitation.
Yeah, and it's especially hard to hold these employers accountable
Right.
when you're dealing with these temporary workers who are often afraid to speak up.
Exactly.
It's like a catch-22.
Yeah.
They need the work, so they're coming here,
Right.
but then they get trapped in the system that can sometimes take advantage of them.
Yeah. And it's a really difficult situation to navigate.
So what can be done? Like,
Yeah.
is there a way to address these problems
Yeah.
without just creating a mountain of new regulations.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes overly bureaucratic solutions can sometimes do more harm than good.
Right.
So it's about finding that balance, you know?
Yeah.
I think we need a multifaceted approach, one that tackles the issue from, different angles.
Okay. So what would that look like?
So first off, we need to strengthen those enforcement mechanisms.
Okay.
Think proactive inspections of farms and workplaces,
Okay.
and serious penalties for employers that are caught breaking the rules.
Okay.
Send a clear message that exploiting workers is not okay.
But I think that only gets us so far, right?
Right.
Like, what about empowering the workers themselves?
Absolutely. Giving them clear information about their rights, access to legal aid,
Yeah.
protection, if they choose to report abuse.
Yeah.
And, we can't forget about language barriers.
Right.
Translation services are going to be crucial to make sure that they understand their rights.
Yeah. And this might sound a little out there, but
Yeah.
do you think consumers have a role to play in this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Consumer awareness is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, by demanding ethically sourced products
Okay.
and supporting businesses that prioritize fair labor practices,
Okay.
we can create an environment where exploitation is not just frowned upon,
Right.
but it's bad for business.
Right. So it sounds like we really need like a joint effort here.
Yeah.
We need the governments, the employers, the workers,
Uh-huh.
and even us, the consumers,
Yeah.
to all be involved in this.
We're all interconnected in this system.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we forget that.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here?
Right.
What's the takeaway message for our listeners
Yeah.
who are, trying to wrap their heads around all of this?
Well, I think the first thing is to kind of challenge our own assumptions.
Okay.
And to look beyond the headlines. I
Yeah.
think it's easy to fall into these simplistic narratives about immigration.
Right.
But the reality is always so much more complex.
It's so easy to get caught up in the numbers
Yeah.
and forget that we're talking about real people.
Right. Exactly. Like there are human beings behind these policies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Behind these statistics.
Yeah.
This seasonal worker visa program, it's just one tiny example of the ethical questions that globalization raises.
Right. Because we tend to focus on the goods and services,
Yeah.
moving freely between borders. But what about the people?
What about the people making those goods?
Right.
Picking the crops,
Right.
They deserve to be treated fairly.
It makes you wonder,
Yeah.
is there even such a thing as ethical consumption in a system like this
Yeah.
that relies on cheap labor?
That's a really tough question.
Yeah. But maybe by talking about it,
Yeah.
shining a light on these issues,
Absolutely.
we can at least start to make things a little bit better.
Awareness is the first step.
Yeah.
And then, advocating for change,
Yeah.
holding those in power accountable.
Right.
And I think that's how we create a system that works for everyone, for the workers and the economy.
Yeah, because it's not about us versus them.
Exactly.
It's about, recognizing that we're all in this together.
Shared humanity,
So what can our listeners do? How can they actually take this information
Right.
and apply it to their own lives?
Well, I think what we've learned about the UK's program,
Yeah.
it highlights how interconnected our world really is.
Yeah.
So I'd say be informed consumers.
Okay.
Have conversations about ethical sourcing and labor practices.
Yeah.
Support policies that protect workers' rights,
Right.
no matter where they come from.
Right. Because our choices have consequences.
Absolutely.
The food we buy, the clothes we wear.
Everything.
Yeah. Everything.
Yeah,
There's a human story behind all of it.
there is. And unfortunately, some of those stories are not good.
Yeah.
But, we've talked about the complexities,
Yeah.
the challenges, the potential for abuse, but
Yeah.
there's also hope.
Yes.
There is workers speaking out, organizations fighting for their rights,
Yeah.
consumers demanding better.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final question to think about.
Okay.
What responsibility do countries have to protect the rights of these temporary workers,
Yeah.
especially when those workers are so vital to their economies?
That's a question we all need to consider.
Yeah, it's a really important one.
It is.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder that until next time. Keep diving deep.